Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you every book that I've read during lockdown, as well as what I'm currently reading and what I'm going to be reading next. If you're new here and you like things all low impact living, sustainable living and book recommendations, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another video. Just a quick thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, but we'll talk about them a little bit later on. So 2 years ago I decided to do a book challenge after a very long hiatus of not reading, and I realised I was not reading diversely enough, especially for someone who claimed to be a major part of environmental activism online. So I set about trying to diversify my reading list as much as possible. And lockdown was one of the times I decided I really wanted to look at more into environmental racism, understanding poverty disparity or economic disparity, and just kind of why those living on the front lines of climate change really are marginalized communities. So I'm going to put my whole list down below of everything that I talk about. There are so many books, surprisingly, to everyone and me. So I'm going to be kind of mentioning some, but going into more detail of others, and they're also going to be chapters as well, so you can skip between the ones that you find most interesting. So I'm going to talk about what I'm currently reading first, because I think that that's really important and maybe is more on topic for you guys on this page. So I'm talking about 2 books that I'm reading about environmental racism, and then the other ones are going to be split into what I've read, fiction, non-fiction, memoirs, and what I'm going to be reading next as well. So grab a cup of tea and let's get into it. So the 2 books on environmental racism that I'm reading are Clean and White, A History of Environmental Racism in the US by Carl Zimring. And then the second one is Toxic Communities. It's all about residential mobility and industrial pollution and environmental racism by, I think it's Dorchetta E. Taylor. I'm only about 100 pages into both of them, but they are incredible. They talk a lot about the history of environmental racism, but also how it started, the environmental movement, how economic disparity is a big reason, but also kind of the history of just hygiene and understanding how white Americans particularly saw Europeans as being hygienic, and all this kind of history that we don't get taught anywhere else. I would highly recommend both of them, and so far I'm really enjoying them and really learning a lot. The other book that I'm also currently reading is Grit by Angela Duckworth. I talk a lot about habits and productivity and stuff, but not toxic productivity. And Grit is one of the books that I've really found or am finding incredibly interesting, especially because Angela Duckworth has just a huge array of background in research and, I feel like a lot of people who write these books, they don't have as much intellectual background as she does, and her research is just incredible, and it's just wonderful. I am really enjoying it. It's all about how the people who are most successful in life are the ones who kind of have real grit, or some people are born with grit, some people really learn how to develop grit, and she kind of talks about those people and how they're successful. Obviously, natural talent does play a role in some things, but the people who have grit, who might have a bit of talent but not that much, can definitely go a lot further than those who have lots of talent but like no grit to actually get anything done. But yeah, I'm finding it really interesting, and the research is really interesting. So those are 3 books that I am currently reading. Okay, so let's talk about the books that I have read, and we'll start with fiction. So I've read 7 fiction books, and 2 by Celeste Ng, who is amazing, and you should all read her books. Little Fires Everywhere and Everything I Never Told You. I've also read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Byung, Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, Lullaby by Leila Slimani, and The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. I'm not going to talk about all of them, I'm only going to talk about my favourite ones, but I'll put them all down below as well. So Girl, Woman, Other is it's definitely one of my favourites. I think Girl, Woman, Other and Everything I Never Told You are my 2 top favourites out of my fiction that I've read. Celeste Ng has an ability to take these huge topics like race and really break them down and to kind of insert them into our everyday relationships in the domestic sphere, to understand how race relations play a role in very small domestic life and actions. And also, if you haven't heard of Little Fires Everywhere, it's actually now been made into a series that you can watch. That is so good. Although I think the book is a lot better. So if you're going to choose between the 2, I'd choose the book, because the book is definitely better. But she uses these incredible devices to talk about difficult things and shows them, and in actuality, how they play out. I just love her books. I think that they are profound. I came away feeling profoundly changed by them, and my understanding of what it must, well, obviously I will never understand what it's like to be a Chinese American child growing up in a very white neighborhood, like in Everything I Never Told You. But she allows you to kind of step into their shoes and be a fly on the wall in their relationships and their hardships and their emotional well-being during these kind of fundamental and pivotal moments in their lives. And you can see how that can have a huge impact on your mental health, your physical health, and your relationships. And then you have Girl, Woman, Other, which every single chapter is a different person and a different person's perspective, but everyone is linked to another person in some way. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be someone, a daughter, etc. And I fell in love with this book when I started to read Dominique's story, and it touches on so many different things. It touches on LGBTQ rights, it touches on trans rights, what it's like to grow up as a black woman in the UK, what it's like, what a womanist society or community is. There's so many things. Also racial inequality within British theatre and things like that. So I love this book. I would highly recommend it. Highly, 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 highly. So I also read 3 memoirs. I read Becoming by Michelle Obama, Heavy by Kiese Limon, and Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I loved all 3. Well, did I love all 3? I liked all 3. I think in order of preference, I liked Heavy the most, then Becoming, and then Viktor Frankl's book. I'm not sure quite why I didn't connect as much with Man's Search for Meaning. Everyone loves it, so I kind of feel a little bit awkward saying that I didn't love it as much as everyone else did. But Kiese Limon's story about Heavy was my absolute favourite, because he touches on so many different topics like emotional abuse and sexual abuse or sexual violence. He also becomes an intersectional feminist at university, and just talks about all of these incredible different topics, and he brings it back to his experiences as a black man growing up in Mississippi and the kind of racial inequality and injustice that he faced not only at university but also when he became a professor. And because it's a memoir, I feel like it's so, I don't know, the title has like a dual meaning, because heavy also relates to his physical weight, as well as it relates to how heavy he feels the weight of racial injustice as he moves through life. And it's a beautiful story as well as a heartbreaking story. So I would highly recommend that book for sure. Obviously, Becoming is an incredible book, obviously. Michelle Obama is one of the most interesting women I think I've ever read. And I don't think that we ever like, this book really illuminated how wonderful, how intelligent, how incredible she actually is. I don't think the mainstream media, I mean, obviously, ever really talks about all of her achievements, who she was before she even met Barack Obama. Like, she on her own is a fiercely intelligent, wonderfully loyal, it's a wonderful story, and I really do recommend it. I recommend all of them, to be honest, but I just want, I love them. I love them. Okay, let's move on to non-fiction. I read 7 non-fiction books as well, and these were split into different kind of categories. I read 3 on habits and motivation and productivity. I read 1, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, about Indigenous wisdom and plant teachings and how far we've been removed from the way that Indigenous people kind of treat the land and the soil and their regenerative agriculture, and also cultural erasure of Indigenous peoples and the kind of history behind how the US tried to erase their culture and the kind of things that they did, like taking their children away and things like that, which is horrifying. And then I've also read Natives by Akala, and I read for the 3rd time Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge. Oh, I also read Influencer by Brittany Hennessy. I'm not going to talk about that because that's about kind of like influencer marketing, and I just wanted to like understand more about the algorithms and how marketing even works, because I know nothing about marketing. And if you are interested in Instagram or YouTube marketing or starting your own channels, then that is definitely a good book to read. If you do know quite a lot already, then it's probably not the book for you to read, because there probably isn't any need to. My camera ran out of battery, so I stopped for a quick coffee break. Okay, so the 3 books that I read on productivity, habits, etc. I read Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Motivation Myth by Jeff Hayden, and then Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. I only recommend Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. Even though Atomic Habits is good and James Clear is legit, I personally really didn't like The Motivation Myth. I felt it was very shouty. I felt like I was shouted at a lot of the time. I particularly liked Tiny Habits because BJ Fogg actually created the design lab at Stanford and has been researching behavioral design for over a decade. So he is legit, and also his approach, for me personally anyway, really worked. And he has countless anecdotes and experiences of other people who have used the design method or his design method to actually change their lives. If you're someone that, you know, bases everything in research and design and has spent a decade doing it, I'm far more likely to trust what you say about behavioral change and behavior design than someone who necessarily hasn't had that much experience. And while I still think that Atomic Habits is really good, I just prefer Tiny Habits, and I think that it is a really nuanced and well-rounded approach to behavior change without kind of trying to push these like toxic productivity ideas, and more about just helping you to just be happier or healthier or just change a few bad habits or increase a few good habits. Honestly, it has changed the way that I have shaped this channel. It's changed the way that I approach work and reading and learning. And the reason why I've actually read so many books is because I implemented a tiny habit. And that was just reading one page every night. And I know one page doesn't seem a lot, but one page turned into 10 pages that turned into a whole book. And this is why I've read so many books during lockdown. So I highly recommend Tiny Habits. Atomic Habits, yeah, it's good. It is good. Motivation Myth, don't recommend. But it's only because I don't recommend his approach. I much prefer the approach of BJ Fogg. Okay, and then I've also read Akala's Natives, Race and Empire, and also Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Obviously, everything that's going on in the world, I think it's incredibly important not only that we read about anti-racism, but also we understand how we can be anti-racist, whilst also understanding our own history. So obviously, if you're Australian, I really recommend reading about Australian history from an Aboriginal's perspective, or if you're US based, reading from an American history perspective from, you know, African Americans who've lived through the slave trade and actually understand from a different perspective than just kind of white slave owners and, you know, white historians. So same with the UK. Reading Akala's book really opened my eyes to so many things in history that I just didn't realise I was so biased to because of who I learnt history from and the education system in the UK, sorry. And that's why there is a call for trying to change the curriculum in the UK and trying to teach black history, not just, you know, white colonial history. And I highly recommend. Akala's book is really nuanced and covers so many different things, from growing up mixed race in the UK, talking about his Jamaican heritage, his Scottish heritage, whilst also having a look at history and how we've been taught history and what specifically we've been taught, and him teaching us an alternative approach from a different perspective. So I would highly recommend reading that one. Also, if you haven't read Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, Renée Edo-Lodge is an amazing writer. This is also very UK centric, whilst also obviously talking about the US and globally. But it's really great because it kind of makes you look at yourself and your own internal biases and understand, wow, I didn't realise that was a microaggression. Why didn't I realise that's a microaggression? Because of white supremacy and systemic racism. There are so many things that we don't acknowledge as white people, and that's really dangerous and problematic. And I think it's really important that we read books on anti-racism so that we can not only be part of the solution, but help to really deconstruct racial structures to ensure that we're not upholding white supremacy and trying to keep the power that white people have and benefit from at the harm of others. So I would highly recommend. I have a lot more books that I'm going to be reading about on anti-racism, and these just barely scratched the surface. Just before we get into my to-read list, I want to say thank you to Squarespace again for sponsoring today's video. Squarespace gives people a powerful and beautiful online platform from which to create your website. And it has powerful blogging tools to tell your story, share your updates, and post photos and videos. If you didn't know, I actually host my website with Squarespace so I can show off my photography as well as some helpful tips to live more sustainably. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/sustainablyvegan to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Okay, and there are 4 books on my to-read list, which I have. So the first one is Free Food for Millionaires. If you don't know Min Jin Lee, I loved Pachinko. Pachinko is one of my favourite books because I love historical fiction. I love understanding and learning about wars or race relations, etc. through fiction, because I think it's another good way in. Obviously, I think non-fiction is really, really important, but it's another way in for those of you who find it hard to read non-fiction about things like this. And yeah, I loved Pachinko, so I wanted to read more by Min Jin Lee, so I looked up and found this one. I haven't started it yet, but it's about Korean immigrants in the US. It explores the fundamental crises of immigrants' children, how to bridge a generational gap so wide it's measured in oceans. Yeah, so I don't know anything about this apart from that, and I just love Min Jin Lee. I love that their books are so long. I love to be able to get really absorbed, and I just don't know enough about, even though I've read Pachinko, like that's one book, I don't know much about the Japanese occupation of Korea. All I know is what I've learned from Pachinko. I don't know about the Japanese kind of occupation of other countries. I'm actually currently reading, I don't know why I didn't mention this, I'm currently reading How We Disappeared by Jing Lee, and I actually found this book because I was looking for more books by Min Jin Lee. This is all about Chinese citizens moving to Singapore for a better life or to find work, and then kind of the Japanese occupation of Indonesia as well, Singapore. And it discusses comfort women, and it discusses, well, I'm only like 50 pages in, so I haven't read it yet, but highly recommend if you want to learn more through historical fiction. And then we've got American Marriage by Tayari Jones. Again, this has been widely recommended, so I really wanted to read it. And it says, newlyweds Celestial and Roy are the embodiment of the American dream. He is a young executive and she is an artist on the brink of an exciting career, until one day they are ripped apart by circumstances neither could have imagined. Roy is arrested and sentenced to 12 years for a crime Celestial knows he didn't commit. Devastated and unmoored, Celestial finds herself struggling to hold on to love that has been her centre, taking comfort in Andre, her closest friend. It's pretty apt for the times because it says it's a moving portrayal of the effects of a wrongful conviction. And if you haven't heard of the new Jim Crow, or you haven't watched the documentary 13th on Netflix, it talks about how the US really finds new ways in different eras to criminalise blackness or being black. And the new Jim Crow is definitely a really good book that I would highly recommend. I don't know why that's not on this list, guys. I've read so many and my mind is just fuddled, but I'm really excited to read this because so many people have talked about how great it is, and again, terrifying. So if you're looking for a fiction, I'd read American Marriage. If you're looking for a non-fiction, I'd read the new Jim Crow. And then I have two more. You guys are amazing. On Instagram I did a live and I asked you guys for I haven't read any books by Central or South American authors, which I know is terrible. So you guys recommended Isabel Allende to me. So the first book I got was Island Beneath the Sea. And this is because this was the only book I could find that was available of hers. But this one is about, it is 1770, and Tete, born into slavery on the Caribbean island of Saint Domingue, has survived a childhood of brutality and fear. When ambitious plantation owner Toulouse Valmorain arrives on the island, he purchases young Tete to serve his bride. But bloody revolution soon arrives at the plantation gates and they must flee the threatening chaos of the colony that will become Haiti for the raucous, freewheeling enterprise of New Orleans. As I said before, I just love understanding more context before I read some fiction books, but I'm so excited to read this book, and I definitely think that it's going to be the first of many I read of hers, for sure. Okay, and the last book that I'm on my to-do list is another book to do with environmental racism, and it is Packing Them In, an archaeology of the environmental racism in Chicago from 1865 to 1954, and it is by Sylvia Hood Washington. And again, I need to learn about environmental racism. I need to learn about the barriers towards to sustainability, because if we don't, and I haven't, acknowledged them in the fullest extent and understand the context for them, then it's really hard to be a true environmentalist and understand how we can make this movement less whitewashed and more inclusive for everyone. It says on the back, Sylvia Hood Washington's Packing Them In provides strong and often startling evidence of the depths and complexities of environmental racism in Chicago in particular, and offers an innovative historical explanation for how this social ill developed in 19th and 20th century America. Yeah, I think this is going to be really fundamental for my learning because, as I said, I'm reading one that's generalized on the US at the moment, the history of environmental racism, but to look at one city in particular I think will really help us to understand the details and the nuance within a system, and how definitely governments and kind of systems within cities can leverage certain power to push marginalized groups further into poverty. And that's probably a really big example as to why Flint are still without clean water. So there are lots of examples of environmental racism within the US, and I think looking at Flint and also Detroit would be a really good way of kind of unpacking environmental racism, hopefully in some more videos. So this video is quite long, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm going to put all of these books down below. I will go into more depth about some of these books in specific videos. I just wanted to give you a general overview of what I am reading. I am going to be making a video on the barriers to sustainability and things that we need to talk about more in depth, so that's definitely coming, because I can't claim to want to be anti-racist and not do the work and then put it online as well. So got a lot of reading and a lot of learning to do. If any of you guys have read any of these books, please leave them down below, and I think that's it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please give it a like if you did like it. Let me know what you're reading, what you recommend, and I will see you guys very, very soon. Bye.